My in-laws forced me to sign a prenuptial agreement. Remember, this is Ethan's house. Everything here is his. They were happy after I received $20 million, but I handed them the divorce papers and the prenup. Have you ever been treated like a gold digger when you're actually the one with the gold? I'm Amanda, and this is the story of how I went from being seen as a fortune hunter to holding all the cards. But before I tell you what happened when that $20 million hit my account, you need to understand how perfectly they played me. Or so they thought. Picture this, me, a 28-year-old high school teacher sitting across from Ethan Mitchell at that little coffee shop on 5th Street. He was everything I wasn't supposed to fall for. Tall, charming, with that easy smile that comes from never worrying about money. His Rolex caught the afternoon light as he reached across the table to touch my hand. "I've never met anyone like you, Amanda," he said, and I believed him. God, I believed him. The proposal came 6 months later. Ethan took me to the same rooftop restaurant where we'd had our third date, the city sparkling below us like scattered diamonds. When he dropped to one knee with that Tiffany box, I thought I was living in a fairy tale. The ring was beautiful, a 3-carat solitaire that probably cost more than my annual teacher's salary. But fairy tales don't prepare you for meeting the dragon. Margaret Mitchell stood in the doorway of their Beacon Hill mansion, holding a delicate china teacup like it was a weapon. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, not a strand out of place. She wore pearls, of course, the kind that probably had their own insurance policy. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, her smile as cold as Boston Harbor in January. Her pale blue eyes swept over my Target dress and drugstore earrings with the kind of assessment you'd give a used car. But her eyes, God, her eyes said something completely different. They said, "You don't belong here, and I'm going to make sure you know it. Can you spot a red flag when you see one? Because I should have run right then." That first family dinner was like walking through a minefield blindfolded. The dining room was all crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of dead relatives who probably never smiled when they were alive either. I tried to make conversation about my job, about how much I loved teaching American literature to seniors. "Teaching," Margaret repeated, stirring her soup with surgical precision. How quaint. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Robert, Ethan's father, didn't even look up from his plate. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, but I could feel him shrinking into his chair. I know you've felt this too, that moment when someone makes you feel small just by existing in their space, when your accomplishments suddenly feel insignificant under someone else's gaze. The conversation moved on to stocks and real estate, topics that sailed over my head like private jets I'd never afford. I sat there, smiling and nodding, feeling like an actress who'd forgotten all her lines. And that's exactly when Robert reached into his briefcase and placed a thick document in front of me. "What's this?" I asked, though my stomach already knew. "Just a formality," Ethan said quickly, but his voice had that strained quality you get when you're trying to convince yourself as much as the other person. "Every marriage needs proper protection." Margaret leaned forward, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Remember, dear, this is Ethan's house. Everything here is his. We're simply protecting our family's legacy." The prenuptial agreement was 43 pages long. I know because I counted them while they watched me like hawks circling prey. Page after page of legal language that basically said, if this marriage doesn't work out, you get nothing. Not the house, not the cars, not even the wedding gifts. "It's standard," Robert assured me, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd never been questioned. "Every wise family does this." I signed it. God help me. I signed it right there at their dining room table while they watched. My hand shook as I wrote my name, but they didn't see it as nerves. They saw it as guilt. But here's what they didn't know. What none of them knew as I carefully placed the pen back in its holder and smiled my sweetest smile. I had a secret that was about to change everything. You see, While they saw Amanda the teacher, the simple girl from the modest side of town, I was hiding something that would have made Margaret's perfect china cup shatter in her manicured hands. That teaching job, it wasn't just a job. It was my cover story. 3 years ago, I'd graduated from MIT, not with a teaching degree, but with a master's in computer science and business analytics. Before that quaint teaching position, I'd spent 2 years at Goldman Sachs as a financial analyst, learning how the real money moved in this world. We've all had to hide parts of ourselves to fit in, haven't we? To make others comfortable with who they think we should be? But my real secret was sitting in my laptop bag, just 20 feet away in Ethan's car. A business plan that was about to turn the entire Mitchell family's world upside down. While they were busy protecting their legacy from me, I was building my own. The call came 3 days after I signed their precious prenup. I was in my classroom grading essays about The Great Gatsby. How's that for irony? When my phone buzzed. Amanda. The voice on the other end belonged to Jennifer Chen, the venture capitalist who'd been courting my education technology startup for 8 months. I'm calling with good news. We're prepared to offer you a Series A funding round. My heart stopped. How much? $20 million. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because the universe has a twisted sense of timing. $20 million. More money than the entire Mitchell family legacy wrapped up in their precious real estate and investments. But here's the beautiful part. The paperwork wouldn't be public for another 2 weeks. 2 weeks where they'd continue to see me as the little teacher who needed their protection. The wedding was moved up. Suddenly, Margaret was in a rush to get me legally locked into that prenup before I could change my mind. She didn't say it like that, of course. She wrapped it in concerns about venue availability and seasonal flowers. Summer weddings are so much more romantic, she cooed, flipping through bridal magazines with the enthusiasm of a general planning a military campaign. If you were me, would you tell them the truth? Or would you let them hang themselves with their own rope? I chose the rope. The next 2 weeks were a master class in irony. Margaret took me dress shopping, her face lighting up when I showed interest in the less expensive options. Practical, she called my choices, like it was the highest compliment she could offer. Robert discussed the realities of marriage with Ethan in voices they thought I couldn't hear from the kitchen. She seems sweet enough, he said, but we had to protect the family assets. You understand. Ethan did understand. That was the problem. But I had my own understanding brewing. Every evening I sat in my small apartment, the one I'd kept throughout our relationship because Margaret thought it showed appropriate independence, and worked on the final details of my company launch. EdTech Revolution wasn't just another startup. It was a platform that would transform how underprivileged kids accessed advanced education. Every algorithm I'd written, every late night I'd spent coding, was about to pay off in ways that would make the Mitchell family's old money look like pocket change. The morning of the wedding, I woke up to a text from my lawyer. Papers are filed. Congratulations, Miss Sullivan. You're officially worth $20 million. I stared at my reflection in the mirror of the bridal suite. The dress was beautiful. Margaret had insisted on paying for it. Another way to remind me who held the purse strings. But the woman looking back at me wasn't the scared teacher who'd signed that prenup 2 months ago. She was someone else entirely. Are you ready? Linda, Ethan's sister, peeked her head around the door. She was the only Mitchell who'd ever treated me like family instead of a threat. More than you know, I said. The ceremony was perfect. Magazine perfect. Mitchell family reputation. Perfect. 200 guests in the most exclusive venue in Boston. Margaret had orchestrated every detail like a conductor leading a symphony of social superiority. As I walked down the aisle, I caught sight of her in the front row. She was practically glowing with satisfaction, probably calculating how much money she'd saved the family by getting me to sign that prenup. If she only knew. Ethan looked handsome at the altar, genuinely happy in a way that made my chest tight. He loved me. I knew that much was real. But love isn't always enough when it comes wrapped in conditions and protection clauses. Do you, Amanda, take Ethan to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. And I meant it. But not in the way any of them thought. The reception was a blur of champagne toasts and congratulations. Robert gave a speech about family legacy and traditional values. Margaret dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. And then, just as the dessert course was being served, my phone buzzed with a news alert. EdTech Revolution secures $20 million series of funding round. Founder Amanda Sullivan hailed as rising star in educational technology. I excused myself to the powder room where Linda found me 5 minutes later, staring at my phone. Amanda, you look like you've seen a ghost. I turned the screen toward her, watched her eyes widen as she read the headline, did the math, realized what this meant. Holy shit, she whispered. Linda, I said carefully, how much do you think your family is actually worth? Her face went pale. Why? Because I think I just became the richest person at this wedding. Linda's eyes filled with something between admiration and terror. They don't know, do they? Not yet. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at our reflections in the ornate mirror. 2 women in expensive dresses, but only one of them was about to rewrite the rules of the game. Amanda, she said finally, there's something you should know about my family's finances. And that's when everything I thought I knew about the Mitchells crumbled to dust. They're broke, Linda whispered. Well, not broke, but nothing like they pretend. Dad's been gambling. Not just poker nights with friends, but serious gambling. Online, casinos, investment schemes that were basically betting. They've been living on credit and reputation for 3 years. The powder room suddenly felt too small. What about the house, the cars? All mortgaged to the hilt. The house has 2 loans against it. Dad owes money to people who aren't exactly forgiving about late payments. My $20 million suddenly made sense in a way that made me sick. They hadn't been protecting their fortune from me. They'd been hoping to protect themselves with mine. How much do they owe? Linda's voice was barely audible. Last I heard, about $15 million, but it's been growing. $15 million. My new company's valuation could literally save them, and they had no idea. But I was starting to understand something else, something that made my wedding dress feel like a costume in a play I'd never auditioned for. Margaret hadn't underestimated me. She'd researched me, planned this, orchestrated our meeting. The coffee shop where Ethan and I met. It was 3 blocks from the school where I taught. The rooftop restaurant where he proposed. Margaret's friend owned it. Nothing had been coincidence. Everything had been calculation. They'd hunted me like prey, and I'd walked right into their trap with my heart wide open. Except now, I was the one with the teeth. The wedding reception was still in full swing when I made my decision. But here's the thing about having $20 million suddenly appear in your bank account. It doesn't just change your net worth. It changes your perspective on everything, including revenge. Linda was still staring at me in that powder room mirror when I smiled. Not the sweet, accommodating smile I'd been wearing for months, but something else entirely. Linda, I said quietly, I need you to know something. I've known about your family's financial situation for 6 weeks. Her face went white. What? I hired a private investigator the day after I signed that prenup. Did you really think I'd sign away my rights without doing my homework? I touched up my lipstick with steady hands. MIT doesn't just teach you computer science. They teach you how to research. The truth was, I'd suspected something was off from that very first dinner. Nobody pushes a prenup that aggressively unless they're protecting something or hiding something. Robert's expensive watch with the scratched face, Margaret's designer handbags that were 2 seasons old, the way they both tensed whenever anyone mentioned current market conditions. So I'd done what any smart woman would do. I'd investigated. You knew they were broke, and you still married Ethan? Linda's voice cracked. I married Ethan because I love him, but I also married into this family because I wanted to understand what desperation looks like when it wears Armani. The private investigator's report had been thorough. Robert's gambling debts weren't just significant. They were dangerous. The kind of debt that comes with interest rates that could break kneecaps. Margaret knew, had known for years, and had been systematically selling family heirlooms to keep them afloat. They targeted me, not because I was vulnerable, but because I appeared financially harmless. A teacher with a modest apartment and a sensible car. Someone who could be controlled, manipulated, and ultimately discarded if necessary. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated how much I hate being played. "The prenup," I said, pulling out my phone and scrolling to a familiar contact. "Want to know something funny about that 43-page document I signed?" Linda nodded mutely. "I had my lawyer review it before the wedding. Turns out your parents' attorney made a fascinating error." I hit call and waited. "David, it's Amanda. Yes, I know it's my wedding day. Is everything ready?" David Chen had been my lawyer since my Goldman Sachs days. Sharp, expensive, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. He'd been the one to negotiate my Series A funding, and he'd been the one to find the loophole that would change everything. "Perfect," I said into the phone. "Implement immediately." I hung up and turned back to Linda. "The prenup your parents made me sign protects Ethan's assets from me in case of divorce, but it doesn't protect their assets from him. And as of 20 minutes ago, when that news article went live, I became what lawyers call the injured party in a marriage based on financial deception." What does that mean? It means that prenup just became toilet paper. Linda's reflection in the mirror looked like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. "Amanda, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to give them exactly what they wanted." I straightened my wedding dress and opened the powder room door. "They wanted to marry into money. Congratulations, they just did." The ballroom was golden with candlelight when I returned. Margaret was holding court near the champagne fountain, regaling some distant relatives with stories about dear Amanda's humble background and how charity begins at home. She saw me approaching and smiled that patronizing smile I'd grown to despise. "There's our beautiful bride. We were just telling the Harrisons about your little teaching job. So admirable, really, working with those public school children." "Actually, Margaret," I said, accepting a champagne flute from a passing waiter, "I have some news about my work." The conversation circle went quiet with that particular brand of silence that comes when people sense drama approaching. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. It seems my little teaching job was just a side project. My real company just secured $20 million in Series A funding. Margaret's champagne glass didn't just slip from her hand. It seemed to dissolve. The crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sound like breaking dreams. "I'm sorry, what?" Robert appeared at his wife's elbow, his face the color of old parchment. $20 million. I repeated clearly. "My education technology company, I founded it 3 years ago. MIT graduate, former Goldman Sachs analyst. You know how it is." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. "But you're a teacher," Margaret whispered. "I am a teacher. I'm also a millionaire. Funny how someone can be both, isn't it?" Robert was doing math behind his eyes, the kind of desperate calculation that happens when someone realizes they've miscounted the cards in their hand. $20 million. Enough to pay their debts, save the house, restore their reputation. And it was all in the hands of the woman they'd treated like a charity case. "Amanda," Robert's voice was carefully controlled, This is wonderful news for the family." "Is it?" I tilted my head. "Because according to the prenup I signed, everything I own stays separate from Ethan's assets. What's mine is mine. What's his is his. Remember? Those were your exact words." Margaret's face was cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, calculation, panic, forced delight. "Of course, darling. We always knew you were special." "No, you didn't." My voice cut through her backpedaling like a blade. "You knew I was useful. There's a difference." Ethan appeared at my side, confusion written across his features. "Amanda? What's going on?" "I'm just sharing my good news with your parents about my company's funding round." He blinked. "Your company?" "EdTech Revolution. I've been building it for 3 years. We just went public with our Series A announcement." I watched his face change as the implications sank in. "Surprised? You never told me you had a company. You never asked what I did before teaching. You just assumed." The wedding reception continued around us, but our little corner had become its own universe of reckoning. Other guests were starting to notice the tension, the way conversations paused mid-sentence as people strained to hear what was happening near the Mitchell family table. Margaret recovered first, her social training kicking in like muscle memory. "Well, this is certainly unexpected, but wonderful. So wonderful for our family's future." "Our family's future," I repeated. "That's interesting, Margaret, because I've been thinking about family legacies lately." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a manila envelope. "David delivered this just before the ceremony. It's a full financial analysis of the Mitchell family assets and debts. Fascinating reading." Robert went very still. "Amanda, I don't think this is the appropriate time." "When is the appropriate time to discuss financial deception? Before the marriage, when you might have mentioned that you need my money to avoid bankruptcy? Or after, when you've successfully tied me to a family that's $15 million in debt?" The words hit like physical blows. Margaret actually staggered. "How did you—" Robert's voice trailed off. "How did I know? Private investigator. Same way you researched me before orchestrating my meet-cute with Ethan." Ethan's face went white. "What? Oh, you didn't know that part either?" I turned to my new husband with something that might have been pity. "The coffee shop where we met. Your mom's friend owns it. She specifically asked them to call her when a young woman matching my description became a regular customer. The timing of your business meetings in that neighborhood? All arranged." The house of cards was falling, and I was the wind blowing it down. "This is insane," Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. I could see him remembering things, conversations that had seemed natural at the time, but now felt choreographed. "Is it? Your sister Linda can confirm everything. Can't you, Linda?" Linda, who had followed me out of the powder room and was now standing at the edge of our disaster zone, nodded slowly. "It's true, Ethan. Mom and Dad have been planning this for months." Margaret's social mask finally slipped completely. "We were protecting our family by hunting me like prey, by securing our son's future, by lying to him about everything." I looked at Ethan, whose face had gone from confusion to devastation. "They didn't just research me, honey. They manipulated both of us. You think you fell in love naturally. Every date location, every restaurant, every coincidental encounter, it was all planned." The cruelty of it was breathtaking, really. They'd stolen his agency as much as they'd tried to steal my assets. But here's where the story takes a turn you might not expect. Looking at Ethan's face, seeing the moment he realized his entire relationship had been orchestrated by his parents, something inside me shifted. The anger was still there, burning bright and clean, but underneath it was something else. Heartbreak. For both of us. Because despite everything, despite the manipulation and the lies and the prenup designed to rob me blind, I did love him, and he loved me. That part, at least, had been real. "Ethan," I said quietly, "I want you to know something. When I figured out what your parents were doing, I had a choice. I could have walked away. Should have, probably." He was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "But I stayed because I wanted to believe that you were different from them, that what we had was real, even if how we met wasn't." "It is real," he said desperately. "Amanda, whatever my parents did, what we have is real. Is it? Because when they put that prenup in front of me, you didn't question it. When they talked about protecting the family assets from me, You agreed. When they treated me like a gold digger, you let them. The truth of it hung between us like a blade. I love you, he said. I love you, and I'm sorry, and we can fix this. How? My voice was gentler now, but that somehow made it worse. How do we fix the fact that you were willing to let them treat me like a threat to be managed instead of a woman to be cherished? Margaret made a sound like a wounded animal. Amanda, please. We can work this out. We're family now. I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. Family. You know what, Margaret? You're right. We are family now, which means I have some good news and some bad news. Robert's hands were shaking as he reached for his drink. What do you mean? The good news is that I'm not going to destroy you financially. I could, with what I know and the lawyers I can afford, I could tie you up in court until you lose everything. But I won't. Relief flickered across their faces. The bad news is that I'm not going to save you either. The relief died. $20 million could solve all your problems, pay your debts, restore your reputation, secure your future, but you're not getting a penny of it. But you're married to our son. According to the prenup you forced me to sign, my assets remain separate. What's mine is mine. What's his is his, remember? I smiled, and it wasn't kind. Congratulations. You played yourselves. Margaret was crying now, mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. Please, you don't understand. We could lose everything. You already have lost everything. You lost your integrity when you decided to hunt me like an animal. You lost your son's respect when you manipulated his love life. And you lost any claim to my help when you made me sign that prenup while looking down on me. I turned to Ethan, whose face was a battlefield of emotions. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry they used both of us. But I can't stay married to someone who would let his parents treat me like a threat instead of protecting me from them. Amanda, wait. The divorce papers are already drawn up. David's been busy tonight. I reached into my clutch again and pulled out another envelope. I'm not taking anything that was yours before we married, but I'm not giving you anything that was mine either. The prenup that was supposed to protect the Mitchell family fortune from me was now protecting my fortune from them. You can't do this, Robert said desperately. It's our son's wedding day. It's my wedding day too, and this is my wedding gift to myself. Freedom from people who see relationships as transactions and love as a weakness to be exploited. I handed Ethan the divorce papers and the original prenup, the document that had started this whole mess. Keep this, I said, tapping the prenup. Frame it if you want. It's the most expensive mistake your parents ever made. The ballroom was still full of guests, still golden with candlelight, still perfect in every way that didn't matter. But I was done being the victim in someone else's story. I was 28 years old, worth $20 million, and finally free to write my own ending. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Margaret calling after me. Amanda, please, we can work this out. We're family. I paused at the ballroom doors and looked back one last time. At Margaret, desperate and broken. At Robert, calculating whether begging or threatening would be more effective. At Ethan, standing in the wreckage of his parents' schemes with divorce papers in his hand. And at Linda, who gave me a small nod that said she understood. No, Margaret, I called back, my voice carrying across the shocked silence of 200 wedding guests. Family doesn't hunt each other for sport. Family doesn't treat love like a commodity. And family sure as hell doesn't make you sign a prenup to prove you're worthy of basic respect. I walked out of my own wedding reception and into the Boston night, leaving behind the people who had tried to make me small. But here's the thing about stories like this. They don't really end with walking away. They end with what you build after you refuse to be anyone's victim. 3 months later, EdTech Revolution's second funding round closed at $50 million. 6 months after that, we launched in 15 school districts across Massachusetts. A year later, we were national. I kept the engagement ring. Not out of sentimentality, but because I'd earned it. Every carat represented a lesson learned about people who confuse manipulation with strategy. Ethan tried to reach out several times. Apology letters, flower deliveries, shows of remorse that might have worked if I hadn't learned the difference between genuine regret and damage control. The Mitchell family lost their house 8 months after the wedding. Robert's gambling debts finally caught up with them. Margaret had to sell her precious china collection piece by piece, but Linda kept in touch. She'd used the chaos of that night to finally escape her family's toxic dynamics, moved across the country, and started her own business with a small loan that I may or may not have co-signed. Sometimes people ask if I regret how it all played out, if I wish I'd handled things differently, been kinder, found a way to make it work. The answer is no. Because here's what I learned from the Mitchells. Some people see kindness as weakness and generosity as opportunity. They mistake your love for naivety and your trust for stupidity. Those people don't deserve your mercy. They deserve your truth. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to refuse to be their victim. My name is Amanda Sullivan. I'm 30 years old, worth $100 million, and I've never signed another prenup. But if I did, I'd make sure to read the fine print, because the house always wins, unless you own the house.